Listener discretion is advised. This episode contains detailed discussion of murder, sexual violence, child abuse, and execution. It is intended for mature audiences only. January 9th, 1991. Harbor Oaks, Florida. A biker bar called The Last Resort. It is the kind of place that exists at the edges of things. Neon signs, scarred wood, the smell of beer and cigarette smoke soaked into every surface. It is early. The bar is quiet. And inside, a woman is found sleeping. She is heavy-set, blonde, in her mid-30s, wearing clothes that have seen better days. Officers place her under arrest on an outstanding firearms warrant under a false name. It appears routine. A minor caller. A woman with an outstanding warrant picked up on a slow morning. Her real name is Aileen Wuornos, and she has murdered 7 people. The officers processing her that morning do not yet know the full weight of what they are holding. But in the hours and days that follow, as investigators complete the picture they have been assembling for months, the truth of Aileen Wuornos will become one of the most examined, most debated, most contested criminal cases in American history. Not simply because of what she did, but because of who she was, because of what had been done to her, and because the line between victim and perpetrator is not always a clean one. This is her story. They seem ordinary. They hold jobs, have families, smile at their neighbors. They are the ones you least suspect. And sometimes, by the time you know what they are, it is already too late. I am Ben. Welcome to Dark Whispers, Serial Killers. Aileen Carol Pittman was born on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan. A leap year child, a birthday that only arrives once every 4 years. It is the kind of detail that feels, in retrospect, like a small symbol of a life that was always slightly outside the ordinary calendar. Aileen Wuornos would spend her entire existence in the gaps where the standard rules did not seem to apply to her. Her father was Leo Dale Pittman. He was a convicted child molester. He never met his daughter. By the time Aileen was born, he was already imprisoned in Kansas for crimes against children. He died by suicide in his prison cell in 1969. She never knew him. His existence was, at most, a name and a record. Her mother, Diane Wuornos, was 19 years old when Aileen was born. By 1960, she had decided she could not, or would not, continue raising her children. Aileen was 4 years old. Her brother Keith was 6. Diane left them with their maternal grandparents, Lori and Britta Wuornos, and disappeared from their lives. Lori and Britta legally adopted both children. For years, for most of her childhood, Aileen believed they were her biological parents. She would not learn the truth until she was in her teens, another layer of abandonment delivered after the fact. The Wuornos household was not a sanctuary. Lori Wuornos has been described by multiple sources as physically abusive, cold, and domineering. Allegations persist, disputed, but never fully resolved, that the abuse extended beyond physical violence. What is documented is the atmosphere, a home defined by fear, unpredictability, and the absence of safety. Aileen began surviving outside it as soon as she was old enough to try. By her early teens, she had dropped out of school. She was drinking, smoking, sleeping rough in the woods near her home, occasionally selling herself to older men for money or cigarettes. She was a child doing what children do when there is no adult who will protect them. She adapted to the reality she had been given. In March of 1971, Aileen gave birth to a son. She was 14, perhaps 15 years old. The pregnancy is reported to have resulted from sexual assault by an acquaintance of her grandfather, though this has never been officially confirmed and the precise circumstances remain disputed. The baby was placed for adoption. Aileen did not speak of him publicly in any detail at any point in her life. Her brother Keith, the one constant, the one relationship that had existed throughout her childhood, was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. He died in 1976. He was 21 years old. From his life insurance policy, Aileen received approximately $10,000. She spent it within 2 months. There is no single moment in Aileen Wuornos' early life that you can identify as the fracture point. Because there was no fracture. There was never a foundation to fracture. From the very first facts of her existence, the absent father, the abandoning mother, the abusive household, the pregnancy at 14, the death of her only sibling, almost every variable was wrong. Each experience compounded the one before it. And the woman who emerged from those years carried all of it, everywhere, every day. Aileen hitchhiked to Florida. She was in her late teens and early 20s, young, alone, and experienced in the particular survival skills of someone who has been on the roads for years. Florida, in the mid-1970s, was a state of transience and reinvention, a long corridor of highways, motels, roadside bars, and ocean light where a person could disappear or start again, or both. In 1976, she met Louis Gratz-Fell. He was 69 years old, a yacht club president in Georgia. They married. The relationship lasted weeks. Fell obtained a restraining order after Aileen assaulted him with his own cane. She returned to the highways. Over the following decade, Aileen accumulated arrests across multiple states, disorderly conduct, armed robbery, assault, check fraud. She moved constantly, used multiple names, and survived primarily as a highway prostitute, flagging down drivers along the long, remote stretches of central and northern Florida. US 1. Interstate 95. State roads 19 and 27. Corridors through rural country where transactions happened far from witnesses, and the only protection available was the protection you carried yourself. She carried a gun. She had learned what happened to women who did not. In 1986, at a gay bar in Daytona Beach, Aileen Wuornos met Tyria Joanne Moore. Tyria was younger than Aileen, quieter, steadier. They began a relationship that would last several years. For what may have been the first time in her adult life, Aileen had someone she wanted to stay for, someone she believed in, someone she would work to keep. Aileen worked the highways to support them both. Tyria, by most accounts, was aware of how the money came. The relationship continued. Aileen kept working, and at some point in 1989, something shifted. November 30th, 1989. Richard Mallory was 51 years old. He owned an electronics repair shop in Clearwater, Florida. He was driving the roads of Central Florida on a winter night when he encountered Aileen Wuornos. What happened in that vehicle is known, in the official record, only through Aileen's account. And her account, stated consistently from the moment she gave it, was this: he attacked her. She fought back. She pulled a .22 caliber handgun and she fired. Richard Mallory's body was found on December 13, 1989, in Volusia County, wrapped in a piece of carpet. He had been shot multiple times. What the jury at Aileen's first trial did not hear, what was ruled inadmissible, was that Richard Mallory had a prior criminal record. Specifically, he had served time in Maryland for rape. He was a convicted rapist. This information was not presented. The jury convicted without it. Whether knowing this would have changed the outcome is a question that has no answer. What it did was leave an irreducible uncertainty at the center of the case that has never been resolved. Aileen Wuornos did not stop after Richard Mallory. Between late 1989 and November of 1990, Aileen Wuornos killed 6 more men. All were middle-aged to older white males. All were traveling alone on Florida highways. All were shot at close range with a .22 caliber handgun. All were encountered through the same pattern: a roadside meeting, a sexual transaction offered, a moment of proximity, and then gunshots. David Spears was 43 years old. A construction worker from Winter Garden. He had been reported missing by his ex-wife. His naked body was found on May 19, 1990, off Highway 19 in Citrus County. He had been shot 6 times. Charles Cad-Um was 40 years old, a part-time rodeo worker from Missouri. He was traveling to Tampa to see his fiancée. He had a fiancée. He had somewhere to be. His body was found June 1, 1990 in Pasco County, shot 9 times with a small caliber weapon. Peter Seams was 65 years old, a missionary and amateur sailor from Jupiter, Florida. He was on his way to visit relatives in Arkansas. He was the only one of Aileen's confirmed victims whose body was never recovered. His car and what happened to it would become one of the pivotal breaks in the investigation. Troy Burris was 50 years old, a sausage delivery driver from Ocala, working his regular route through Marion County. He went missing on July 30th. His body was found August 4th off State Road 19, shot twice. His delivery truck was found separately on the other side of Ocala. Dick Humphreys was 56 years old, a retired Air Force major, a former child abuse investigator, a man who had spent years of his professional life trying to protect children from harm, a father of 7. He was found on September 12, 1990 in Marion County, shot 7 times. Walter Gino. Antonio was 62 years old, a truck driver and reserve police officer from Merritt Island. His body was found November 19th near a remote logging road in Dixie County, shot 4 times. He was nearly naked. His car, his reserve police badge, and his police equipment were later found in Aileen's possession. That equipment would help accelerate the investigation. 7 men across 12 months on the highways of central and northern Florida. Florida has 67 counties. In 1990, each county ran its own law enforcement. Volusia had a case, Citrus had a case, Pasco had a case, Marion had 2, Suwannee had a case, Dixie had a case. The common threads were there. Highway locations, .22 caliber ballistics, lone male victims, missing vehicles and valuables. But aggregating those threads required a level of interagency coordination that was slow to come. In the meantime, the evidence was accumulating in plain sight. Motel records across Central Florida showed a woman matching Aileen's description, checking in, sometimes, with a companion, paying with credit and debit cards that were later identified as belonging to her victims. Pawn shops in the Daytona Beach area had received cameras, tools, and personal property stolen from murder victims. Florida law requires a thumbprint at pawn transactions. Those prints were on record. No one had yet matched them. The moment that changed the investigation came on July 4, 1990. Peter Seams's car was found wrecked near Orange Springs, Florida. 2 women had been seen running from the scene. Witnesses described them, one large and blonde, one smaller and darker. Composite sketches were generated from those descriptions and held back initially while investigators worked the lead. In November and December of that year, with the task force now formally constituted, the sketches were released publicly, to newspapers, to television stations. They reached the right people. 2 informants in Volusia County's biker community recognized both women. They gave investigators names, Lee and Ty, Aileen and Tyria. They gave them locations, known bars, known haunts, a trail that led directly to the last resort. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement had, by November 1990, formally convened a multi-agency task force dedicated to the highway murders. The internal language in those task force documents was striking. Even at the time, investigators were formally considering the possibility of a female serial killer. That classification, a woman operating as a predatory highway-based killer motivated by material gain, had almost no precedent in FDLE or FBI profiling history. It required a recalibration of assumptions that had structured law enforcement thinking for decades. The task force cross-referenced the composite sketches, the pawn shop records, the motel registers, the stolen vehicle reports, and the criminal histories of female suspects. The pawn shop thumbprint was eventually matched. The aliases were connected, the identity resolved. Aileen Wuornos. Multiple prior arrests, multiple prior aliases, active in Daytona Beach and the surrounding area. Investigators placed the last resort under surveillance. On January 9, 1991, Aileen was found there and taken into custody. She did not resist. Tyria Moore had left Aileen sometime in late 1990. She had gone back to Pennsylvania to her family. She was not present at any of the murders. She was not, in a strictly legal sense, criminally culpable for what Aileen had done. But she had known, she had stayed, she had accepted the money. Investigators flew to Pennsylvania and made Tyria an offer, full cooperation, in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Tyria Moore accepted. Between January 10th and 14th, 1991, investigators set Tyria up in a hotel room in Daytona Beach and had her make a series of recorded phone calls to Aileen in jail. The calls were constructed carefully. Tyria said she was scared, that her name was coming up in the investigation, that she needed Aileen to do something to clear her. She appealed consistently to the one thing about Aileen Wuornos that had never changed, her need to protect the person she loved. Aileen listened. Across multiple calls over 4 days, she reassured Tyria, told her not to worry, told her she would handle it. On January 16, 1991, Aileen Wuornos asked to speak with investigators. She gave a recorded confession admitting to all 7 killings. The confession was detailed and specific and consistent with the physical evidence in most of the cases, and it was framed, clearly, repeatedly, without ambiguity, as self-defense. Every one of them, she said, every man. Each had attacked her or threatened to or tried to rape her. She had been a working woman on dangerous roads doing a dangerous job, and she had defended herself. Prosecutors did not accept the framing. She was charged with first-degree murder. On January 27, 1992, Aileen Wuornos was convicted of the first-degree murder of Richard Mallory and sentenced to death. The conviction came in a trial during which the jury did not hear about Mallory's prior rape conviction in Maryland. Aileen's attorneys argued it was directly relevant. The court excluded it. Over the months that followed, Wuornos entered guilty or no contest pleas to 5 additional murder charges. She was sentenced to death multiple times over. She was transferred to death row and began a decade-long wait. In those years, Aileen became something she had no control over and likely never wanted to be, a subject of fascination. Documentaries, feature films, academic papers, legal commentaries. The story of a woman who killed men and who said those men had first tried to kill her struck a nerve in debates about gender and violence and justice that have never been fully resolved. A Hollywood film starring Charlize Theron won major awards and reached audiences who had never heard the name Aileen Wuornos. Whether the woman in those portrayals bore any real resemblance to the woman on death row is a separate question. Nick Broomfield, a documentary filmmaker, interviewed her twice, in 1992 and in 2002, shortly before her execution. In the second interview, those around her described a woman whose grip on reality had become fragile. She spoke of prison staff contaminating her food, of manipulation, of forces working against her in ways she could describe but not name. Whether this was genuine psychotic breakdown, accumulated trauma response, or the inevitable consequence of over a decade in solitary adjacent conditions on death row is something that psychiatrists and criminologists have debated and not agreed on. In her final years, she partially recanted her self-defense narrative. In one recorded statement, she said she had simply wanted to rob the men. In another, she reasserted that at least some of the encounters had been violent. The truth of each individual moment, what happened in each vehicle, on each highway in 1989 and 1990, went with her. On October 9, 2002, Aileen Carol Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison in Starkey, Florida. She was 46 years old. Her last meal was a cup of coffee. Her final statement was brief and strange. She said, "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock and I'll be back, like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all, I'll be back." whatever she meant, and there are many interpretations, from religious conviction to dissociation to something else entirely. They were the last words of a woman who had never, at any point in her recorded life, been given the tools, the safety, or the stability to say clearly what she actually needed. 7 men died on Florida's highways. Richard Mallory, 51, David Spears, 43, Charles Cars Cad-Un, 40, Peter Seams, 65, Troy Burr-Is, 50, Dick Humphreys, 56, Walter Gino Antonio, 62. Each of them was a person. Each of them had a life that did not end on their own terms. Dick Humphreys was a father of 7 who spent his career investigating child abuse. Charles Cars Cad-Un was on his way to see his fiancée. Peter Seams was going to see family. None of them deserved what happened to them. And yet the forensic record on Aileen Wuornos is also real. Clinical evaluations identified borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder. Features consistent with post-traumatic stress disorder, attributed to a lifetime of documented abuse and exploitation beginning in early childhood. A woman who had been abandoned at 4, assaulted in adolescence, pregnant at 14 or 15, homeless as a teenager, and sustained in adulthood by nothing except her own will and the road she walked. The FBI classification of Aileen Wuornos as a serial killer is accurate. The framing of her as one of the very few women in profiling history to be designated a predatory, mission-oriented killer is accurate. And the context, the abandonment, the violence, the exploitation, the systemic failure at every level is also real. Both things are true. They have always both been true. What the case of Aileen Wuornos asks of us, what it has always asked, is whether we can hold two true things at the same time, whether we can look at violence and ask not only what it was, but where it came from. Whether the systems built to protect people from harm also bear any responsibility when they fail to protect children who grow up to do harm. Whether justice, as it is practiced, is ever truly complete. Richard Mallory had a prior rape conviction. The jury that sentenced Aileen Wuornos to death did not hear it. Tyria Moore, who knew and stayed silent for years, received immunity and walked free. Aileen Wuornos was executed. The rock, the mothership, whatever she was sailing toward. We are still asking the question she left behind. I and Ben. Thank you for listening to Dark Whispers, Serial Killers. New episodes every week. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, the scariest monsters are the ones you never suspect.